Inside this tiny tomb was enough treasure to make modern billionaires jealous. No war. No empire. Just a teenage king, buried with a room full of gold nobody found for 3,000 years. Tutankhamun became pharaoh at 9. He died at 18 or 19. No wars won. No pyramids built. By most measures, a minor king. So why does his tomb outshine almost every other pharaoh's in history? Because of what happened to theirs, and what didn't happen to his. For thousands of years, tomb robbers stripped Egypt's royal burials bare within years of the funeral. Even the greatest kings were left with empty tombs. But Tutankhamun's tomb was small, easy to miss, buried under rubble from later construction. Not mystery, accident. And that accident preserved it. In 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter, funded by Lord Carnarvon, was running out of time and money in the Valley of the Kings. Then his team found a step cut into rock. Then more steps, leading to a sealed door. Carter peered through a small hole, candle in hand. Carnarvon asked if he could see anything. Carter's answer became one of the most famous lines in archaeology. Yes, wonderful things. The tomb contained over 5,000 individual objects. Let's go through the standouts and put real numbers on it, because gold doesn't mean anything until you know what it's worth. The mask covering his mummy's face is probably the most recognized object to ever come out of ancient Egypt. Solid gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli and colored glass, built to carry his face into the afterlife looking exactly like a god. It weighs around 10 kilograms. At today's gold price, that's over $1 million in raw gold alone, roughly the cost of a penthouse apartment in a major city. Except this one was never for sale, and you definitely can't finance it over 30 years. But as the most recognized object to survive ancient Egypt, hypothetical sale estimates for a piece like this run anywhere from $100 million to $500 million. One face. $500 million. Let that sit. Not the outer coffin. The final, innermost layer, made entirely of solid gold. It weighs over 100 kilograms. In raw metal value today, that's somewhere north of $14 million. For a box built purely to hold a body no one was ever supposed to see again. That's enough to buy a small fleet of Ferraris and still have money left over to build the garage. Add in the fact it's the single most famous coffin on Earth, and the real number is anyone's guess. Just know it's not for sale at any price. Not everything buried with Tutankhamun was treasure. Tucked in an unmarked box were 2 miniature coffins, each holding a tiny mummified body. DNA testing later confirmed what researchers suspected. They were his daughters, stillborn at roughly 5 and 8 months. Their mother was Tutankhamun, his wife, and also his half-sister. No nameplates. No grand shrine. Just 2 small gold-faced coffins, sized for children who never took a breath. They're the only children Tutankhamun is known to have had. And they died with him, literally, buried in his tomb, because they never got the chance to live anywhere else. The single most valuable item in the tomb wasn't gold at all. Tucked beside his mummy was a dagger with an iron blade. In 2016, a research team led by Italian scientist Daniela Camelli analyzed its metal composition and confirmed it was forged from meteoritic iron that fell from space. In Tutankhamun's era, centuries before anyone figured out how to smelt iron ore, meteoritic metal was rarer and more valuable than gold. Egyptians didn't even have a word for iron yet. They called it metal from the sky. This one you genuinely can't price. Rarer than gold in his era, harder to get than a literal moon rock, and NASA still won't sell you one of those either, at any price. Tutankhamun's second dagger, this one with a solid gold blade, found resting on his abdomen, not far from its more famous iron sibling. On raw materials plus provenance, you're looking at a low to mid 7-figure piece. And that's the less famous dagger in this tomb. Tutankhamun's internal organs weren't left inside his body. Each one was removed, individually preserved, and sealed inside its own miniature gold coffin, small enough to fit in 2 hands. For organs. For separate solid gold coffins. Each one carved and detailed like a tiny version of his full sarcophagus. It's the ancient equivalent of commissioning 4 separate gold watches, each engraved and fitted, just to store one specific organ of your own body. For separate 7-figure objects, just to store a liver. All 4 coffinettes were then placed inside a separate gilded shrine, built purely to house them. Carved from wood, covered in sheet gold and silver, and inlaid with colored glass and semi-precious stones. The throne depicts the young king seated while his wife anoints him with oil. It's not just valuable. It's considered one of the finest surviving pieces of decorative art from the ancient world. If it ever came up for public auction today, it's the kind of piece that would open in the tens of millions at a major auction house, and the room would still gasp when the final number hit. 6 full chariots, built for war, hunting, and ceremony, each layered in gold leaf and detailed down to the harness fittings. Owning 6 matching chariots in his era was less practical transport and more status flex, the ancient equivalent of a private aircraft fleet, except every single one required an actual horse and considerably worse shock absorption. As a set, that's a private jet hangar's worth of value, tens of millions combined, minus the private jets. Gold and gemstone battle armor, so fragile it took Carter's team years just to reassemble it from scattered pieces scavenged across the room. A one-of-a-kind royal battle costume. Value, solidly into 8 figures once you price the reconstruction work alone. Life-size, gilded wood, flanking the entrance to the burial chamber like eternal bodyguards who never got paid overtime. Museum-grade sculpture like this would open well into 7 figures. Rare metal instruments, supposedly used to summon gods or armies. Rare metal, extreme age, and a spooky reputation. That's a premium 7-figure item on rarity alone. Collars, bracelets, anklets, pectorals, earrings, all solid gold and semi-precious stone. More bling than a rapper's vault, and every piece was custom fitted for one specific 18-year-old. Combined value, comfortably into 7 figures. His burial crown. Gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli and colored glass. Vulture and cobra worked into the design. Mid-6 figures in gold and gems alone, before you even price an actual crown of a pharaoh. His actual mummy was buried wearing solid gold sandals, with individual gold caps fitted over each toe. Purely in gold weight, that's a low 6-figure sum on his feet alone. Dozens of carved alabaster jars, many still holding traces of oils and resins meant to accompany him into the afterlife. For comparison, the most expensive perfume sold commercially today runs somewhere around $200,000 a bottle. Tutankhamun had a shelf of rare, custom-blended oils for a body that would never smell anything again. Over 100 of them, some plain, some gold-capped. One cane, fine. 130 says either collector or guy who really struggled to walk. Turns out it's the second one. A 2010 DNA and CT scan study on his mummy confirmed Tutankhamun had a genuine club foot, made worse by a bone disease that was slowly destroying blood flow to his foot. He likely needed a cane just to walk, which is exactly why over 100 of them were buried with him. As a single lot, that's easily a 6-figure sum in antiquities value. Ebony and ivory, essentially a luxury games console for a teenager who had eternity to kill. As an intact ancient gaming set, something like this would fetch well into 6 figures at auction today. And that's still barely a third of the 5,000 objects found inside. Here's the rest, fast. 413 miniature servant statues, called Ushabti, meant to magically wake up and do manual labor in the afterlife on his behalf. An ivory headrest carved with lions. A gilded ceremonial fan of ostrich feathers. A painted battle chest showing him crushing enemies in his war chariot, standard royal propaganda for a war he never actually fought. A gilded shrine of the god Anubis guarding the tomb entrance. Fully intact model boats built to sail him into the next world. A life-size mannequin used to store and fit his royal wardrobe. Over 100 pairs of sandals and a dozen sumptuous robes. A second board game, the Game of 20. A ceremonial cheetah skin shield. Gilded bows, arrows, and curved swords built for battles he never fought. Miniature coffins packed with preserved cuts of duck, beef, and goat, so he wouldn't go hungry. Wax perfume cones meant to melt and scent his skin for eternity. Carved cosmetic vessels still bearing the fingerprints of the thieves who once tried to rob him. Protective gold amulets and scarabs wrapped directly into his mummy bandages. This was a minor king. A teenager. And this is what his burial looked like. Historians still debate what a tomb built for a major, long-reigning pharaoh, one never looted, might have contained. Put it all together, the gold, the gems, the meteorite, The artistry no one can even put a price on. And a reasonable modern estimate for the whole tomb runs into the several billions of dollars. Once you stop counting the raw metal and start counting rarity, craftsmanship, and the fact that essentially none of it can ever legally be sold, that number only climbs. For comparison, when just 50 of these pieces toured the British Museum in 1972, that partial selection alone was insured for £9 million. 50 objects, not even 1% of the full collection, and even then, nobody involved fully grasped what the complete tomb was actually worth. One teenage king. One small, forgotten tomb. Multiple billions of dollars nobody was supposed to find. Tutankhamun ruled for less than a decade and accomplished little we know of. He was buried with enough gold to make a modern billionaire jealous, and 2 tiny coffins, holding 2 daughters who never got to be born. The wealth and the grief, sealed in the same small room, for 3,000 years. Not because he was the greatest king who ever lived, but because he might be the only one they never got to rob, and the only one whose whole story, gold and lost together, survived to be told.